we do need to show them it is still work, right? But you can choose sort of a same, very redundant, hourly position. And we all know there's tons of them out there, right? Or you can show them really what sets you different from your competitors. And I think it's really important to play up to those unique things because at the end of the day, guests purchase differences. Employees seeking employment sometimes are looking for different environments. They may not just want to always go do a cashier position somewhere or some form of an operations position somewhere, that it is really important to remind ourselves that most of the time this job is very fun.
Welcome to the Attraction Pros podcast, where we discuss the latest trends and challenges facing the attractions industry today.
We chat with some of the top leaders in the field and provide resources that will help develop your career in this great industry.
I am Josh Liebman. I am obsessed with the guest experience and helping attractions make that their top priority for success.
And I'm Matt Heller. I am passionate about organizational effectiveness, leadership development, and employee engagement.
Now sit upright, hold on tight, and get ready for the Attraction Pros podcast.
Hey, Josh, how are you?
Hey, Matt, I'm doing great. How are you?
I am fantastic.
All right.
Yeah. So I got a question for you.
All right.
Ever been to an attraction or an experience that you just didn't know how to describe afterwards?
Yes.
Can you describe it now?
When I think of Meow Wolf and maybe even Area 15, I think of those as places that I've had difficulty telling people what it is because of their sheer uniqueness.
Yeah. I would definitely think of those two as well. I would also put, if I'm thinking about a roller coaster, X2 at Magic Mountain.
Yeah.
I got off that. I said, I have no idea what just happened. And I don't think I could describe this to anyone in any sort of proper terms.
A lot of spinning. I didn't know which way was up at any given time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fire.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why do
So
you
I was going to say, do you wonder why I'm asking that? Well, I will tell you why I'm asking that, because our guest today, Katy Enrique, who's the director of marketing and sales at City Museum, talks about the fact that it's hard to market someplace where you can't describe the experience, or I shouldn't say can't describe, but the experience is so unique and so different that it's hard to describe. And so how do you put that into marketing terms and build excitement for people to come visit?
So as the director of marketing and sales, are you saying that her job is to describe the indescribable?
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Well, there you go. We got it. We described at least that part of it.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, no, this was such a fascinating conversation. We got to learn all about the museum, its history, and in particular, Katy's background, where she started at Six Flags Great America in Gurnee, Illinois, moved to Six Flags St. Louis, and then most recently took on the role of director of marketing and sales at the City Museum. And it's always interesting to hear about people's career paths and the way that they got to where they are today. And I feel like we really were able to unpack that with Katy and talk about certain elements of her time in the industry that have lessons learned and some insights and really some practical, very useful information for everyone who's listening here.
Absolutely. And we also got to dive into the concept of seeking uniqueness. Certainly she talked about that in terms of the attractions and the activities at City Museum, but she also talked about it in terms of the guests that are seeking a unique experience, but also team members who are seeking a unique experience, and how that can be sort of your differentiator when you're trying to pull in people to a unique, undescribable experience, is to lean into that uniqueness.
Exactly. And then, we talk a lot about, the intersection of the guest and employee experience and kind of connecting a lot of departments together. We talked about her role as marketing. We talked about sales. We talked about HR. We talked about events and operations. And we talked about public relations too. This really became this very big web of just how interconnected everything is. And Katy has just a lot of great, useful, like I said, practical insights. I know I'm just going to repeat what I said earlier, just about how all of that comes together and really brings the experience to life.
So is it time to put Tiny to rest and get to this interview with Katy?
Yep, and I'm going to take notes with the world's largest pencil.
Hey, Katy, welcome to the Attraction Pros podcast. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you guys so much for having me.
Absolutely. So excited for this conversation. Can we just kind of start off kind of learning a little bit more about you and your career?
Yeah, sure thing. I grew up in Gurnee, Illinois, which is like northern suburbs of Chicago, and really Six Flags Great America sat in my backyard my entire life. And so I spent a lot of time at that theme park naturally in your formative teen years. And so I ended up taking up an internship there one year to do guest relations. And that was right between my freshman and sophomore year of college. I was going to college as an elementary education major, spent one summer working with the Great America team, and just completely fell in love with the industry, and immediately went back to college my sophomore year and changed my major over to business marketing. And it probably boded really well for me, because I don't think I'd be a very good teacher. I don't know if I have enough patience to be the wonderful teachers that are around my children these days. So did that guest relations position for 3 summers. And then when I graduated from college, I ended up starting as a sales coordinator with Six Flags Great America. And then I went into their special events representative role, which is doing, the physics days and cheer events and dance fests and any event you can think of in between to really drive a lot of attendance on the shoulder months of the season. And after a few years of doing that role, I moved over into the marketing promotion side of the division, and that was working with, radio partners and TV partners, and working on added value promotions and media buys and grocery store partners, which, people don't do as much anymore, and coupon partners and all that kind of stuff. So did that role for about 3 years. And then I was asked to try the public relations manager role at Six Flags Great America. And for me, that was a very daunting step, because I went from just like doing buys and having a good time to, you're now the voice of that property. You're now setting the tone, and you're now responding to anything that might be going on at the property as well. And I did not have that traditional education upbringing, but was lucky to get some really good training from the company on that. And then a few years after that, a promotion came up, opportunity at Six Flags St. Louis, and decided to take that marketing director role back in November of 2016. So I had been with Six Flags really until March of 2023. And then this really awesome place here in downtown St. Louis that everybody loves and everybody has to go to, that role was available. And so I decided to move careers over here to City Museum. As a huge jump off from my Six Flags days, which were amazing and wonderful, and really try something very different with an incredibly unique space. And that's really one of the St. Louis prides. People from St. Louis love this place. They love recommending it to people. So it's been a really great, transition.
Katy, I'm curious about that transition from going, for-profit theme parks, very corporate and in the amusement space, and then quite a bit of transition into cultural tourism, nonprofit museum space, about what that was like for you.
Yeah, it is different. Well, and also, regional theme parks are largely driving large regional business, right? So you might be seeing more of your local DMA visiting your theme park, in the Six Flags world, but at City Museum, 70 to 80% of our attendance is actually outside of St. Louis. And so as a marketer, it was a really interesting transition to just even get into different, channels of marketing that I really was not doing with Six Flags, and to try to, as people are making their plans into the city, what are they going to do? What are they drawn to? What kind of cultural experiences are they looking to have? Because we 100% play a role in that. We are, a kids museum. We are an architecture space. We are an art space. We are sort of one of the initial immersive art experiences. And we're also an adventure space, so I don't know if you guys know much about City Museum, but it's knee pads, it's headlamps, it's a lot of exploration. It's really like a gritty environment to really get involved in, and not just kind of stand back with your hands clasped behind your back and and look and admire. It's come on, get over here. Let's go climb under this architecture and really get involved.
Katy, I'm so glad you started to describe the City Museum experience, because I think for people who haven't been there, and I've been there, and I still can't describe it,
Yeah.
right? So I think even for people who have not been there, they've seen maybe pictures. It's very different looking, like it's not a traditional museum. Can you kind of explain the experience? Like, I know you mentioned
Yeah.
the headlamps and the knee pads and that kind of thing, and I think you're painting a really interesting picture for people.
Yeah.
But can you kind of walk us through a little bit about what that's like?
Yeah. When we moved here, my daughters were 8 years old. They're in second grade. And so everybody was like, oh my gosh, your kids are at the perfect age. Take them to City Museum right away. And I'm like, oh, yeah, no problem. Let's do it. Like, what is that place? And they're like, nope, it can't be described. Just go. So now, as the marketer here, I'm like, well, there must be a way to describe said location in order to get people to come here. And, we sort of started foundationally as an artist-built playground. So really, when Bob Castley purchased this building back in 1993, he was a sculpture artist. And so he was looking for a big concrete place that he could do large sculpture material in. And then he just started building with a lot of interesting things. So when you come up to City Museum, you'll see on the front part of the building, there's 2 airplanes out there, and they're connected by this rebar that you can crawl through. You can walk on different pathways to it. There's these big anchor points of castles that, have these giant concrete steps that you go down and under. And it's just, fraught with so much exciting adventure. And then when you look up, there's like a school bus sort of hanging over the edge of the rooftop. And so, yeah, it's pretty extraordinary when people just pull up to the parking lot. They're just kind of like taking it all in and looking up and saying like, wait, so what? Like, what are we going to be doing here today? And then they walk in and there's a, man-made cave system that they can explore in. And that's where the headlamps come in because it's a little bit darker. You can crawl around through there. And we have an aquarium in here. And then we have, our spiral slides, which were actually part of the initial shoe company that was in this building. So it's just this wonderful, like, eclectic blend of many things from the city of St. Louis that were built. And, before repurposing was cool, it was cheap material. So they used a lot of that recycled material from the city to just kind of get things going here.
Katy, I wonder if we could dive a little bit into maybe the challenges then of marketing, kind of the describing the indescribable. Maybe it might be one way of putting it, because when people hear museum, that kind of there's a picture already in your mind. But then even if maybe you're visiting St. Louis and you don't know kind of everything that's available, if you're not familiar with the museum, City Museum just says, okay, it's local, right? And trying to actually really unpack what that is. Is it history? Is it art? Is it science? It sounds like it's also a lot of fun as well. So curious as far as kind of how you go about that from a marketing standpoint, addressing that challenge.
Yeah, it is. It can be a challenge because we do have people that will walk in every once in a while and say like, okay, like, where are your docents that are going to like give us a tour? And we're like, well, we don't really have docents here, not that kind of museum. But, I would say we have an incredible amount of user-generated content. So when people are now searching TikTok, St. Louis City Museum, there's really this like whole archive of amazing videos that people have done. And they've done it with POV of coming here with toddlers. They've done it with POV of like their older kid. We've got teenagers that come here. And then we also do a lot of 21 and up events that are on our rooftop. And so we will see a lot of videos coming out from those different adult experiences as well. And then we host a number of like event rentals here, like convention business that comes in. So usually, we now know our tourist guest is a very research-based guest, right? And they are doing a ton of looking up of information. So they'll start at our website, they'll get the video right there on the homepage to kind of get an idea of what the place looks like. They'll go to the About page almost second every single time to read a little bit of the history of the museum. And then they kind of bounce out and they're looking around on social media for all those other like visuals of what's going on in this space. And so truly when people come here for the first time, they have an idea of what's going on in here, but it's just like, so like more than they could have probably guessed it was going to be.
Yeah, and Katy, you talked a little bit about kind of how it came to be, like the old shoe factory and that kind of thing, and some things are left over from that, and just pieces of St. Louis history here and there. I'm curious now, as you maybe expand or think about different attractions or activities, would you say that there's kind of a theme or a direction, or is it just kind of whatever fits over here, whatever fits over there, whatever spare parts we have, we'll make an attraction out of it?
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you, we have 2 floors devoted to spare parts. And so in this 10-story building, we operate the internal museum on floors 1 through 4, and then we have the rooftop, which is our 11th floor, technically. But there's the basic cadence is build with interesting materials first. We really want people to come here. And, I always tease when my girls were little, I'm looking down the whole time, right? I'm watching them because they could get on a slide that goes down 1 or 2 floors. And then it's like, oh, I got to slide with them, or I got to go run down there and go find them real quick. So there's a lot of ways to sort of like your kids can go into these little nooks and crannies of the museum. And then as they started aging up and coming here as like young teenagers, I was like, oh, we can actually start looking up now. And it's like, okay, well, these really interesting printer press plates that make up a lot of the walls here. There's glass bottle walls. There's all sorts of things that, little gears that are around a lot of our columns, old watch bands that are used to make different, like mosaics and stuff around the museum. So I just really love the ability of like that I'm now like looking up so much more that I'm here and I'm not chasing my own children around the museum. That it's really just such an extraordinary thought of this is what we have on hand, what can we make? And Bob always said, with one giant thing, he could make a really incredible feature, right? But he's like, but if you give me 1,000 of something, I can make something else really incredible. So he believed anything was a brick if you had enough of them, and you can see that theme all the way out through City Museum. So we do try to continue to push that whole idea forward. One big interesting material or 1,000 of small things that can make something else.
That's so interesting. So you mentioned the slides. And this question kind of ties into that a little bit. One of the things Matt and I talk a lot about is about the intersection of the guest and employee experience. Yeah. Those two are very much the same thing. And one part of that is the connection between marketing and human resources, particularly from a standpoint of recruitment. Where I'm going with this is on your website, on the About page, you scroll down, there's a headline that says jobs, and it says, does your office have a 10-story slide? It could, we're hiring. Yeah. And then click to view positions. So I wonder if you could actually like walk us through that, or maybe walk us through marketing's role in HR and recruitment and how you're able to work collaboratively across departments to say this, it is the intersection of there's the guest experience on the marketing side, but the recruitment and the employee side, that's also marketing as well, and how it all ties together.
Yeah. And I've always sort of had an interest in working with HR very closely on their messaging, because I'm like, we're really not that different. We are looking for people that want to engage with us and be partners with us. One is just an employee and one is a guest. I mean, there's really not a lot of difference. And, I do think still the younger generation is looking for an exciting place to work. And, we offer a really thrilling environment, very different environment. We offer them the ability to, develop this amazing skill set of, resolving issues, communicating and learning. And we're actually working very closely right now with our HR department to roll out a new orientation, because, we've kind of done one version of orientation. We kind of like post-COVID changed it a little bit. And so now it's like, okay, I think we need to dust it off again and just really see like, are we getting them so excited to work here at City Museum? Because this is such a unique property, not only in St. Louis, but literally the country. And if you've never really left St. Louis, you may not have any clue that this is a bit of a unicorn. You might think every city has a city museum, and they really don't. So we're actually completely like redoing our handbook and our orientation to kind of work through getting them excited right from the get-go. Like, you're in here, let's go do a tour first to show you all the exciting things. And then we can kind of go through like the boring legalese stuff. And then let's go back out and do a scavenger hunt and then kind of come back and finish your paperwork. So trying to kind of balance those, let's get you excited, but we do have to adult for a few minutes out of the orientation too. But yeah, we're always kind of connecting with our HR department just to make sure that, everybody's excited about being here. I mean, you need to attract employees the same way we attract guests.
Well, and I love the way you just put that at the very end. We need to attract employees just like we need to attract guests. And I think one of the things that I hear working with a lot of HR departments and managers is, how do we find people, right? Where do we find those people? And I'm curious, from a marketing standpoint, what advice would you have for HR people besides partner with your marketing team?
Yeah.
What would you say to them in terms of the things that do get people excited that maybe they're not doing in their traditional HR advertising? You know, they're putting up a picture and saying, here's our benefits. You know, we can go so much deeper than that. So I'm curious, what are some of your thoughts on that?
Yeah, we do need to show them it is still work, right? But you can choose sort of a same very redundant, hourly position. And we all know there's tons of them out there, right? Or you could show them really what sets you different from your competitors. And I think it's really important to play up to those unique things because at the end of the day, guests purchase differences. Employees seeking employment sometimes are looking for different environments. They may not just want to always go do a cashier position somewhere or some form of an operations position somewhere, that it is really important to remind ourselves that most of the time this job is very fun. Sometimes it is hard. Sometimes it rains and we have to clear a rooftop. Sometimes the elevator stops and we've got to work through that. Like there are these different problems that we do have to work along the way, but at the end of the day, I think leaning into what makes you different and what makes you fun and what makes you unique helps you find that employee, that applicant that's looking for those things. And I also sometimes think like HR, they deal with a lot of feedback, right? I mean, they're sitting in an office where somebody's coming in typically because they're having an issue. Like nobody's walking in there and saying like, fist bump, today was a great day. Thanks for having me work here today. So I think sometimes they have to be reminded that that's a really small percentage of team members most of the time. Like most people like working here. Most people enjoy the work they do. Most people like the problem solving environment they're in. And so it's like, let's remember to kind of like lift up and remember that and sell that journey for our applicants.
Mm.
You know, it's so funny. I have felt that, but on the guest experience side of leading a guest communications team where we were basically like the complaint department. If you're just looking at all the things of what our eyes are adjusted to, it's like, this place is horrible. Nobody's having any fun at all. And then you divide it out by the total attendance. You're like, oh, what we're dealing with is such a tiny fraction of that.
Yeah.
I'm wondering too, because your function is marketing and sales. And I wonder if you could maybe walk us through how a lot of times those are seen as being the same function, but they're related, but they're not always exactly the same. I wonder if you could share some light on that.
Yeah, I've started my career in the sales department at Great America, which I was hesitant to take that job initially because I was like, oh man, now I'm going to say yes to one sales job at, the age of 23 and I will be in sales for the rest of my life. And I was very worried about it. But it turns out that it really has paid a ton of dividends in my career moving forward because every single day I'm involved in something with our sales department and we are generally selling small group business, and then we're also selling large group business, corporate business. Here, we also do these event rentals, which can be weddings, it can be bar mitzvahs, it can be, we have a dad convention coming in. It can be something completely social and, and completely different than what you typically sell. But understanding the sales function is so critical in marketing because we're all trying to build pipelines, right? Like, on the marketing side, I am building a funnel, right? We call it a funnel instead on marketing, but in sales, it's building your pipeline. And we both have these goals of trying to get as many people into these buckets at first and then kind of pulling them down through the conversion process. And so for the sales team, it's how long did it take you to follow up on a lead? And how long did it take us to get them a quote? And how long did it take for us to close their transaction? And all of those steps along the way are just as critical as they are on the marketing side of when did they see their first ad, their second ad? When did they get to the website? Were we able to close the deal? And was that an easy process as well? So I think even there's parts of our industry that they keep sales and marketing a little bit separate. And I think that can make sense there. But I've always enjoyed having it in marketing because it's also really exciting to sell. Like if you guys have ever had like the benefit of like, signing the buyout contract, it's like, that was pretty awesome. Like we just sold like a really big deal and I know the museum's going to kill it and they're going to execute it incredibly well. And I know these people are going to have a fantastic time. Like it is still like, it's small moments of joy when you kind of get those sales things that you've been working towards and you get them signed and closed.
So Katy, you just talked a little bit about, how you close that sales deal and you know that the museum is going to knock it out of the park, right? They're going to do a great job executing that. And one of the things that Josh and I have talked to some people about is that relationship between marketing and sales and then operations, right?
Yeah.
So we've talked about HR and marketing, and certainly there's a relationship with a lot of different entities around the organization. So can you talk a little bit about how you do go about fostering that relationship so that as the sales and marketing professional, when you are signing on the dotted line, that operations is going to fulfill that because they know exactly what you're looking for and that type of thing?
Yeah, I have never stopped learning how to execute events well, because it changes over time, right? So for instance, my early days at Great America, if I had a client that was coming in before hours or after hours, they were a little off the normal operating calendar, I'd started putting my memos like over the time clock because I didn't want a maintenance truck driving through my event. And the only way to kind of capture their attention, they didn't have email at the time. It was like, oh, I've got to put sort of like a bulletin in front of them that I know where everybody goes every single time. And then that had sort of evolved into, we created this big events calendar and we had weekly meetings at Great America. And we would walk through every single event in detail for the next 2 weeks and then sort of touch on the bigger things that were coming up, so they could get like scheduling working on any nuanced things. Did we need to like remove picnic tables or things like that? And we brought that practice forward into St. Louis. And then we do it here at City Museum as well. Every Tuesday morning at 10 o'clock, we walk through every single event in detail for the next 2 weeks. And then we touch on the big ones that are coming up 4 weeks out, 6 weeks out, just to say, hey, put this on radar. We have this huge event coming up and it's going to require a lot more, all hands on deck or whatever that may be. But I've also just been like a big proponent of social events. Like if your property is hosting a happy hour or just a fun in the Sunday or a family picnic, like showing up to those things and saying hi to those teams that they know your name from a memo or an email, but they haven't met you, like you need to meet them. It's critical. I joined a bowling league at Great America to meet a lot of these people because it was critical that they knew who I was and what I was asking for. And so even the same here, I come to a lot of our events, to as many of our events as I can, because especially when I first started, I want them to kind of like understand what I'm looking for, how I communicate, what were the gaps they might have been seeing, how can I fill in those spaces, and really just kind of keep learning. And we continue to evolve our process all the time because you have to. I mean, the environment changes so quickly. Different technology and CRMs and emails and memos. And are we still typing this up on an Excel spreadsheet? Maybe we are, because that's how the team is used to seeing it, and that's okay. But I think it's sort of a continued check-in and growth, and I never set it and forget it. I'm always pretty involved with a lot of our especially big events because it's critical. So there's going to be a detail that got missed somewhere. So it's just important to be there and be ready to help, problem solve along the way.
So we're talking about marketing, sales, events and operations. We talked about HR. I want to bring another one into the mix as well, too, or really bring it back because you mentioned it earlier, and that's public relations. And you talked about how when you were with Six Flags, you had the opportunity to also take on that role. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned that was a bit of a learning curve compared to what you were used to. So I'm wondering if you can kind of, as we sort of piece together this puzzle of all the departments that make these amazing organizations work, as far as where now that fits in and what differentiates it from areas of marketing?
Yeah, public relations, gosh, I mean, I started that in 2012. That was my first year. And so, social media had sort of come into the mix around like 2009, 2010. We're setting up the Twitter accounts and setting up the Instagrams and Facebooks. And then when I stepped in 2012, I mean, I remember having this moment of like complete panic because Hank Salemi, who was my park president at the time, he was very confident I could do it. And I remember Googling, what is the wire? Because I didn't know what a wire service really was. And what popped up was the wire of the show. And I was like, oh my gosh, how am I going to figure out what anything is in public relations? But the good thing about that community is I had so many counterparts that were like, I'll help you. Let me jump in. I mean, I had Sandra Daniels at our corporate office that was fantastic at getting me trained, and like honestly, like good training, like this is what you should wear, always have an extra pair of clothes in your office, watch back every single thing that you do because you're going to count your you're going to see, are you looking in a weird place? when you're doing an interview and they're like, you know how sometimes they'll say, look at the reporter. Well, they mean it, because if you're looking at the camera, you look kind of crazy sometimes. So I just was really lucky to have a lot of great people around me that kind of pulled me through that initial transition. And then what I found about PR that I love so much was the stunting ability and sort of the silly idea ability that was out there to do some kind of silly things and crazy things and things that got people's radar. And one of those really was, we had this giant inflatable spider that used to be on the side of the American Eagle up there. And the spider had gotten like a tear in it. And the tear was just too big to replace. So we needed to buy a new one, but we couldn't buy it till the next year. And so, Hank had suggested, like, why don't we have a funeral for Tiny? And I'm like, for a balloon? So that's not going to work. And then it was like crazy viral and people love that story. And I found myself doing a chalk outline of a balloon in like the biggest piece of lawn we had at the time. And so like pulling that forward into City Museum, we've now done a Guinness World Record stunt of the most people wearing underwear on their heads back in March here. And really the connector point there is that City Museum is obviously in the city of St. Louis. Its area code is 314, and St. Louis celebrates 314 Day every year, March 14th. And the record for underwear was like 250 or something like that. So I'm like, we just have to get 314 people to put underwear on their head and we'll have a record. And we ended up with 355, but that was like another really important part of learning for PR, was that it has to make sense. Like there's a ton of ideas that come in, and maybe just wearing underwear wouldn't have made sense if we didn't have a giant pair of underwear in our Beatnik Bob's restaurant. And maybe it wouldn't have made sense if we didn't do it on 314 Day. And like all those things really needed to come together. And that's where I see the PR, flywheel really start to spin quite a bit. Is like, okay, I've hit it on hitting St. Louis, hitting 314 Day, hitting on the underwear. It's weird. And City Museum is a little weird. And so like the flywheel just kind of spun with that one that day. And it was really, it's really exciting. And that's like the part of PR that I just love so much, is coming up with sort of those kind of wild ideas.
Well, and I've got to imagine that there's a lot of those wild ideas that have ended up on the cutting room floor,
Yeah.
right? Because you throw so many ideas out, you see what sticks. I'm curious, in your time, have you ever had an idea that you thought was just the best ever and it was kind of a flop?
I thought that actually bringing Tiny back, like her, like not resurrection, but her return the next year was going to be as big of a deal as her funeral. And like nobody could have cared. They're like, good, you bought another balloon and you put it on the coaster. So that one totally flopped. We've had opening days where it's like, we're going to do this really cool thing with capes. And then, like a weather story gets in your way and like you're right out of the fold. We also did like a spider sack thing here last year that I thought was going to be really cool. And like, by the way, a ton of guests took pictures. So like organically it did really well. It didn't do anything for me on traditional. And so there's definitely that whole idea of like, well, just do something viral. I'm like, well, I'm trying every time to do something viral. But the reason of, virality is hard is because it doesn't take every single time.
Two questions. One, what is the wire?
So at Six Flags, we always use one wire service, which is basically you're choosing a mass distribution for your press release to go out and get into, a ton of different, typically traditional media bases. So you're opening a new big attraction, a new roller coaster, or you're doing a big funny stunt. You might put it out on the wire service because you're hoping it sort of like pops and gets a lot of eyeballs. And then there were different levels of wires, like text only, add photos, add video, and those things get, more and more expensive as you get more fancy with them. But it's just a way that if you had not been building your reporter database, or you're like, hey, I want to actually try something beyond my market, you would probably go to the wire service and put out a much larger distribution.
Second question is, we recently interviewed Nick Miller, and he said, I cannot remember the year that this happened, but Great America had a contest to name a gorilla, and he submitted Larry.
Larry.
Was that you?
That one wasn't me, but yeah.
Okay, I didn't know if that was before you were there or not, or yeah.
Yeah, that was a little before me, but yeah, because Larry was like, okay, everybody, we're putting Larry up on this day. I'm like, okay, we'll come record it and take pictures. And then One year, the operations or maintenance team, they added fogger to him, and he sits on top of this giant like observation tower. And like the village of Gurnee started getting all these phone calls. People like, the gorilla's on fire. Fire Great America. And so then, like I start getting, information like, is it true there's a fire? I'm like, no, there's no fire. It's just fog. Sorry. We'll turn it down.
Yeah, that's
fun.
funny. That's funny. So one of the things, we've been kind of talking a lot about your time at Six Flags and the City Museum and how marketing really impacts so many different departments. I'm curious, like going way back, even to your early days when you realized you didn't want to be a teacher, like what are some of those early experiences that you had that might even still be impacting you or influencing what you're doing now?
Yeah, I always think about, so since I was mostly in the special events role, my first few years there, there's a lot of pieces of information to communicate to your client, to the marketing team, to the park then at large. And so I had a lot of like missteps on how late I thought I could communicate things. And that's a very quick lesson that you learn is when you communicate to the operating part of the property too late, sometimes it's too hard for them to pivot. And you're standing there at the front gates ready to welcome guests, and all of a sudden nobody's opening up the parking lot because somebody forgot to tell security that we're opening early or whatever that might have been. So I've definitely had those moments of like, oh no, we're already in here and parking lot's not open. And so really being very intentional and trying to be, forward thinking on what might go wrong or what might be missing. I trust my gut a ton now on like, should I remind that person that this is going on? And I always say yes, because it doesn't hurt to over communicate it. But being in these massive properties that, operate like small cities, you have to be on your game for communication. And there's a huge accountability part in that too, where, we could say, well, I sent out the memo yesterday. And they're like, well, you have to learn to take some accountability on how you can be better, because that's the only way that in this busy space, there is a lot of things going on, the whirlwind of the day, that you can always probably do something a little bit better. And so I'm always thinking about communication and being better at it.
One of the things we wanted to talk about as well is that the City Museum claims to have the world's largest pencil. And just on your website right now, 76 feet long, #2 pencil, 21,000 pounds of pencil and 4,000 pounds of graphite. Is there another pencil you know of that comes close? Is there a 75-foot pencil?
You know what? That one, so we actually even just got like recertified. So we hosted the Science of Guinness World Records traveling exhibit back in January, February, March of this year. And so we had the Guinness World Record team out here quite a bit. And so they were like, yeah, let's definitely like recertify the pencil, because it had an old record company, but Guinness World Records had since kind of taken ownership, I believe, of their record database. So, we actually, which is rare to like hold a record for that long is really, really rare these days, because it's like, as soon as you break one, it's like, sometimes somebody's kind of right on your heels trying to break another one. And that pencil, like, if you were to Google, City Museum pencil, and look at the news clippings, they had to like take the window out of the side of the wall, bring a crane up and like shove it in through the side of the building, because there's no freight elevator that can come up in. I mean, what's so different here is we're dealing with so much more vertical space issues than horizontal space issues. And so everything sort of needs to fit in an elevator to come up to these other floors, or you have to cut a hole in your wall. So the photos from that are actually pretty extraordinary. But as far as I know, to this day, we definitely we still hold that largest pencil record, and there's not one that's really close to it at all.
So Katy, I know you're a listener of the podcast, and we really, really appreciate that. And you may know that this is the first time we've heard the phrase recertifying the pencil on the Attraction Pros podcast. So we appreciate that for sure. One of the things I'm curious about, just again, having been to City Museum and hearing you even describe it, which is, over and above what I've experienced there, is there anything that you would think would be too out there even for City Museum, like as a new attraction?
I don't think so. Again, it would have to still live at like that root goal of building with interesting materials. And, we're probably not going to like call the latest, like slide manufacturer and say, hey, give me that red plastic slide you've got from the catalog. Like that just would not fit with who we are. It needs to be interesting. It likely would want to be some sort of repurposed material or a way for us to add some interesting material around it. We've been working on this labyrinth maze on our 4th floor as our new attraction. And it's taking a lot of time because interesting materials take a lot of time to work with. The amount of like metal grinding and welding and smoothing and, kind of this very fine work that has to happen in there is just what really takes time to get it right. And then you have to experiment like, okay, well, we put a new crawler hanging from the ceiling. Now we have to go crawl in it. Like, how does that feel? Is it right? Is it fitting the ASTM standards that are in line with, playground equipment now? So, everything it's a little bit slower here because it is not, out of the catalog or right off the shelf and just being like put and plunked into the museum. So I don't think we're closed-minded about always hearing about ideas. And then we just kind of run it through our filters. Is it interesting material? Is it something kids can touch, crawl under, run over, jump over? Because we want them to interact with almost anything that's in this museum.
Based on everything that you're describing here, and also kind of tying back into an earlier point that you made as far as like an orientation and talking about the uniqueness of the museum to the city, anyone who I've ever spoken to who's from St. Louis, I feel like they have a connection to the museum in ways that they don't necessarily speak that way about other types of attractions, right? And it's almost, I think the word beloved comes to mind in terms of just the museum's importance in the city. And I'm wondering if you could shed a little bit of light on that, of kind of just the connection between the city and the city museum.
Yeah. So this building was purchased. It's in downtown West, which at the time was sort of an old garment industry. It used to be part of Shoe USA, which St. Louis was a huge shoe manufacturer and distribution space, back 80 years ago. And so when Bob purchased this building, he was intentionally investing in downtown West, which needed some investment. And then as he got building and then got opening, when I talked to our creative director, Rick Irwin here, they were very intentional about saying yes to interviews. Like they really believed in word of mouth. And so if a reporter called from, Belgium, they said yes to the interview. If they got invited out to speak about City Museum, they said yes and they went. And so I think they built a lot of that sort of grassroots PR marketing buzz by just saying yes to a lot of things that, we might say like, oh, does that make sense? Am I going to get a lot of people visiting here from Belgium? Maybe I'm not going to go. But they really wanted to create that buzz. Now, they also built things very interestingly here. The bus just ended up on the rooftop one day. It didn't go through, like, let me submit the permit and let me do all these, fine paperwork details. They did things very quickly and sometimes that caused a lot of friction with the city. So I think people sort of liked seeing a little bit of that rebellious nature going on. And they were like, well, what's City Museum going to be up to these days? Because you really never knew. Now we are not contentious with the city anymore. And, we're playground certified and ASTM certified. Like we're all on the up and up, but they really liked a lot of that sort of rebellious nature that City Museum was doing to challenge the city to keep up.
So Katy, I'm curious, we've talked again about your career and, all the things that you've done. And I'm wondering if you had some advice for people that were pursuing a career in the attractions industry, almost regardless of discipline or department, what would that advice be?
Agility, pivoting, and also learning. Like I never pictured myself as the director of marketing. When I would, sit in the marketing division meetings as the young sales rep or, even as the marketing supervisor, I never thought I had it in me to get to those elevated positions. And honestly, if it had not been for some key mentors, literally like pulling me through the process, and saying like, no, you are smart enough. You're not an imposter. You're okay. You're good. Like you can figure this out. Everybody learns. Like your first couple of years, you're learning. So I would say like, be ready to jump in. Be ready to shadow with some of your operations and food and beverage friends. Go work the front gate for a day or half a day. Answer some phone calls that are coming in to see what kind of calls are you still getting. You know, we now all have a lot of review tracking information. So it's like, can I get a summary of like, what are people's general positives to say? What are their general negatives? And like, just really kind of continue to like seek out that information that can help you understand your space way more holistically than just being in your singular marketing channel. Because if you stay singularly in your marketing channel, well, one, you're not going to develop these really great relationships with the rest of your park or your location, which I think is so critical. And then two, like I think you'll get somewhere a little bit slower. Whereas when you start to make these relationships a little bit outside that channel, you know, you can move a little bit quicker in your career too, and maybe be willing to relocate.
On that last note, actually, is a question that I have as we start to get close to the end of the interview here. Cubs or Cardinals?
That's so funny. So I was Cubs growing up as a kid. And then when I married my husband, his family was a huge White Sox family. So you know, now White Sox has their own set of struggles for sure. But when we moved to St. Louis, he literally wrote a letter to our neighbors because we moved into a cul-de-sac. And it was like, hello, we are moving this day. There's going to be a big semi truck coming with all of our stuff. We apologize if we're in the way. But also, we are White Sox fans, and that's okay because both White Sox fans and Cardinals fans hate the Cubs the same amount. So we will fit in just fine here. And people like that, like, who writes a letter when you move in? I'm like, my husband writes a letter when you move in. But yeah, Cardinals are huge, 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 huge business for St. Louis.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, Katy, this has been a wonderful conversation and interview, and thank you so much for your time. If people wanted to get in touch with you or learn more about City Museum, where would you send them?
Yeah, citymuseum.org is the best place to kind of get started on your City Museum journey. And then LinkedIn, you can find me there, or you can email me, and it's kenrique@citymuseum.org.
Awesome. Katy, this has just been so fascinating. Really appreciated the opportunity to chat with you today. And for everyone out there who is watching and listening, just remember, we are all attraction pros.